It was the summer of 1957, and the sleepy town of Sandpoint, Idaho, was at its most peaceful. The sun dipped behind the mountains every evening, casting a warm orange glow over Lake Pendorale, and the streets filled with the hum of crickets and the faint laughter of kids playing near the old mill. Among the familiar faces in town was Edward Mills, a 32-year-old high school English teacher who'd earned the quiet respect of nearly everyone. He lived alone in a small wooden cabin on the outskirts, a man of routine and gentle manners, with a love for poetry, old records, and late-night rides on his beloved motorcycle, a deep crimson 1947 Indian Chief, polished so perfectly it caught every ray of light. To his students, he was more than a teacher. He was a mentor who spoke about dreams, courage, and the power of curiosity. But beneath his calm demeanor, there were hints that Edward carried something heavy on his mind. His colleagues recalled that he'd been distracted in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, staying later at school, often locking his classroom door for hours. Some claimed they heard strange tapping noises after dark, as if he was hiding something or waiting for someone. A janitor even mentioned seeing Edward staring out the window late one night, looking toward the lake with a face pale as chalk. When asked, he only said he was thinking about old debts and quickly changed the subject. No one thought much of it until that final evening on June 14, 1957. Edward stayed late once again to finish grading papers. Around 9:30 p.m., he waved goodbye to a fellow teacher and joked that he might take one last spin before summer truly begins. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. The next morning, his cabin was found unlocked, the lights still on, and his coffee cup half full on the kitchen table, as if he had planned to return within the hour. The only thing missing was his motorcycle. Townsfolk searched every road and trail from the hills to the lake's edge, but found nothing. Not even a single tire mark. It was as though the night had swallowed both man and machine whole, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of dread that would haunt the town for decades. In the weeks following Edward Mills' disappearance, the small town of Sandpoint transformed from a peaceful lakeside haven into a community gripped by unease. The local sheriff organized search teams, dragging the shallow edges of Lake Pendorale and combing through dense pine forests that surrounded the area. But the lake was vast, over 1,000 feet deep in some spots, and the currents beneath the surface were unpredictable. Divers from neighboring towns joined in, but their equipment was primitive and visibility was nearly zero. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. The search parties dwindled, and whispers replaced efforts. The town's newspaper printed the headline, "Local teacher missing, motorcycle and man still unfound." After a few months, the story was pushed to the back pages, overshadowed by new headlines and summer fairs. But for those who knew Edward, the silence that followed felt wrong. Too sudden, too convenient. As years passed, stories about Edward Mills evolved into something darker, part rumor, part legend. Some said he had simply run away, escaping debts or a broken heart. Others claimed they saw him late at night near the lake's northern ridge, his red motorcycle light flickering through the trees like a ghostly lantern. Teenagers dared each other to visit the spot where he was last seen, claiming they could hear a faint engine humming under the water when the night was still. An old fisherman once swore that he saw tire marks appear and vanish by the lakeshore after a storm, as if something beneath had tried to rise but was dragged back down. For the older townsfolk, Edward's name became taboo, something you didn't mention after dark. Meanwhile, the police kept the case open for nearly 2 decades, rechecking tips and supposed sightings. Each time they came up empty. By the 1970s, the case file had grown thick, filled with yellowed papers, grainy photos, and interview notes. Detectives who revisited the mystery all agreed on one strange detail. Edward's Indian chief motorcycle had never been registered again, never reported sold, and no similar vehicle was ever found on any road. It was as though the lake itself had claimed both man and machine. The sheriff who handled the case in his final years used to say, "That lake holds secrets, and it doesn't like to give them back." But nobody expected that, nearly 7 decades later, the lake would finally speak, and what it revealed would change everything the town believed about Edward Mills. It was a calm morning in the spring of 2025 when a team of environmental divers from the University of Idaho arrived at Lake Penderale. Their mission was simple: to conduct a routine underwater survey for pollution and debris near the Whiskey Rock Bay area. The team, led by marine biologist Dr. Lauren Keene, had no idea that their sonar equipment would pick up something that hadn't been seen by human eyes in nearly 7 decades. As their small research boat drifted quietly across the lake's surface, the sonar display suddenly spiked, revealing a large, metallic shape about 13 feet below the surface. At first, the divers assumed it was just another piece of scrap metal or an old boat engine. But the size, symmetry, and location were strange, too distinct to ignore. They decided to dive. When Dr. Keene and her team descended into the water, the world around them grew dark and eerily silent. The silt at the bottom was thick and undisturbed, and the water temperature dropped sharply as they reached the target depth. Then, through the cloudy green water, a glint of faded chrome appeared. As the divers brushed away decades of sediment, the outline became clear. A motorcycle, its handlebars twisted slightly to one side, its headlamp still intact. The faint lettering on the gas tank emerged like a ghost through the grime. Indian Chief. Every diver froze. They knew immediately what they had found. The lost motorcycle of Edward Mills, missing since 1957, was right there before them, perfectly preserved in the cold stillness of the lake. The team filmed the discovery with their body cameras, but something about the footage unsettled them later. When they reviewed it on the boat, the water around the bike appeared darker, almost black, as if the light had been swallowed whole. One diver, visibly shaken, told reporters later that he'd felt an unnatural chill. At that exact moment, as though something unseen had been watching from the depths, the divers marked the coordinates, surfaced slowly, and immediately contacted the Bonner County Sheriff's Department. Within hours, yellow tape and flashing lights surrounded the shoreline as word spread. For the first time in 68 years, there was a trace. A piece of the puzzle that might finally tell what happened to the missing teacher who rode into the night and never came back. When the Bonner County Sheriff's Department pulled the motorcycle from the water, the entire town of Sandpoint seemed to hold its breath. Reporters gathered near the shore, locals lined the dock, and even the elderly who remembered Edward Mills came to see it with their own eyes. The bike emerged slowly from the lake's surface, dripping with water and history, its crimson paint still faint beneath the grime. It was lifted onto a flatbed truck, covered with a tarp, and taken to a forensic lab for examination. Investigators found the vehicle astonishingly well preserved, likely protected by the cold temperature and lack of oxygen deep below the surface. When they wiped away the mud, a small metal tag was revealed, still clinging to the rear fender. Property of E. Mills, 1957. But what truly sent shivers down everyone's spine wasn't the motorcycle itself. It was what they found attached to it. Strapped to the bike's seat with a corroded leather belt was a weathered satchel, almost intact despite the decades underwater. Inside were fragments of Edward's life, old lesson plans typed on yellowing paper, a broken fountain pen, and a faded photograph. The picture showed Edward standing proudly by the lake, smiling with his motorcycle beside him. But in the background, barely visible through the blur, was a shadowy figure standing among the trees, facing the camera. Investigators enhanced the image digitally, and though the face remained obscured, the outline suggested a man, tall, wearing what looked like a long coat. The discovery sent chills through the investigation team. The photograph had been taken just days before Edward vanished, yet no one ever remembered who took it. It was as if someone had been there, watching him, waiting for the right moment. Forensics experts worked meticulously to preserve every artifact. When they unrolled one of the water-stained lesson sheets, faint handwriting appeared on the back in smudged ink. The note read, "If something happens to me, check the northern ridge. They know." No one understood what it meant, but the message hinted at fear. A warning written by a man who suspected danger was closing in. The mention of "they" ignited a storm of speculation. Who was Edward afraid of? Why the northern ridge? And what secret was he carrying that someone would kill to keep buried? Investigators revisited the town's archives, finding old reports of illegal land dealings, a mining company scandal, and even rumors of missing funds connected to the school board in the 1950s. Whatever Edward had uncovered, it seemed he had tried to leave a trail, and the lake had protected it for nearly 70 years. Now, that trail was about to lead them into the darkest corners of Sandpoint's forgotten past. 2 days after Edward's note was made public, investigators and local volunteers began the climb toward the northern ridge, a densely wooded slope that overlooked the same lake where his motorcycle had been found. The path was steep, overgrown, and eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling wind, just the crunch of boots against dead leaves. It took nearly 4 hours for the search team to reach an old logging trail that hadn't been used in decades. That's when one of the officers noticed something strange. A faint indentation in the earth, like an old wheel rut, disappearing into the trees. Following it, they came upon the remains of a small cabin hidden deep within the pines. The roof had long since caved in, moss covered what was left of the walls, and the air smelled of rot and wet timber. But the structure's age matched the timeline. It could easily have been standing in the 1950s. Inside the cabin, the investigators uncovered a haunting scene. Amid broken bottles, rusted tools, and decayed furniture, they found a charred metal box, half buried beneath the ashes of what once might have been a fireplace. Carefully prying it open, they discovered fragments of burned paper, government forms, hand-written notes, and a partially melted school crest identical to the one from Sandpoint High School, where Edward had taught. Whatever these documents once contained had been intentionally destroyed. Someone had tried to erase them completely. Yet, as forensic experts brushed away the ash, a few words were still visible. Ledger, Northern Deal, Confidential. It wasn't much, but it suggested a cover-up, perhaps involving money, land, or something bigger. One detective quietly muttered, "He knew too much." And for the first time, it seemed Edward's cryptic message, "They know," might be connected to something that reached far beyond a missing teacher. But the discovery didn't end there. Behind the cabin, near a dry creek bed, a K-9 unit began to bark uncontrollably. The officers followed and soon uncovered scattered bone fragments, half buried under layers of soil and leaves. Forensic testing later confirmed that they belonged to two unidentified men, both believed to have died sometime in the late 1950s, around the same time Edward vanished. Neither matched Edward's DNA profile. The mystery deepened. Who were these men, and how were they connected to him? Some locals recalled whispers of two outsiders who'd come to town that same summer, men who'd been asking questions about land ownership near the ridge and had vanished soon after. The theory began to form that Edward might have stumbled onto their secret, or perhaps even witnessed something that cost him his life. The cabin, the bones, the burned papers, all of it painted a picture that was darker and far more dangerous than anyone in Sandpoint had imagined. Weeks passed after the shocking discoveries at the northern ridge, but the answers never came, only more questions. The bones found behind the cabin were buried quietly, their names still unknown, and the burned papers were too damaged to decode completely. What little the investigators could piece together hinted at a corruption scandal buried deep in the town's history, deals made in secret, money exchanged under the table, and threats delivered to anyone who tried to expose it. Somewhere in the middle of all that, Edward Mills had stumbled upon the truth. He hadn't been just a teacher who vanished. He'd been silenced. And the lake, cold and patient, had guarded his secret for nearly 7 decades until it was ready to be found. The restored motorcycle now sits in a glass case inside the Bonner County Historical Museum, its crimson color gleaming faintly under soft lights. People visit from all over Idaho to see it, to stand before the relic of a mystery that refuses to die. Some claim that when the museum grows quiet at closing time, they can hear a faint creak like the slow turn of a kickstand or the soft click of a headlight switch. The security guards laugh it off, but those who know the story say it's just Edward making sure no one forgets him again. His eyes once looked across that lake, knowing danger was near, and maybe, just maybe, he's still watching it even now. And if you ever find yourself driving by Lake Pend Oreille on a foggy night, roll your window down and listen. Locals say that when the wind shifts over the water, you can still hear the echo of a motorcycle engine, distant, steady, and fading toward the northern ridge. It's a sound that doesn't belong to this time or even this world anymore. It's the sound of a man who never made it home, but whose story at last has risen from the depths.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.